There is a company almost nobody has ever heard of. It controls a bigger share of a single critical resource than Saudi Arabia controls of the entire world's oil supply. If that company ever went dark, car prices could climb, major pipeline and construction projects could stall, and the supply chain behind everything from jet engines to MRI machines could get a lot more complicated, almost overnight. This isn't a warning about some distant future. It's the reality the global economy is already quietly built on, right now, today. That mineral is niobium, and once you understand what it actually does and who actually controls it, you'll never look at a bridge, a car, or a pipeline the same way again. Niobium is added to steel in tiny amounts, often less than 0.1%. But that small addition makes steel dramatically stronger without adding weight. That matters more than it sounds like it should. It's why modern car frames can be lighter and safer at the same time. It's why oil and gas pipelines can carry higher pressure without needing thicker, heavier steel. It's why bridges, skyscrapers, and offshore platforms can hold more weight using less material. Beyond steel, niobium alloys show up in jet engine components that need to survive extreme heat. And niobium titanium alloys are the material of choice for the superconducting magnets inside MRI machines and large particle accelerators. According to industry analysts, there is currently no substitute that does this job at the same cost and the same scale across all of these industries at once. Engineers have tried for years. Nothing else comes close. Here's where it turns into a geopolitical story rather than just a material science one. According to the United States Geological Survey's most recent assessment, global niobium production sits at around 112,000 tons a year. Brazil alone accounts for roughly 93% of that, almost all of it from a single deposit, the Araxá complex in the state of Minas Gerais, operated by a privately held Brazilian company called CBMM. Canada's Niobium mine in Quebec is a distant second, contributing a small fraction of what Brazil produces. Everyone else, Congo, Russia, Rwanda, barely registers on the global chart. To put that in perspective, this is a concentration level that even the most powerful oil-producing nations would envy. No single OPEC member controls anywhere close to 90% of global oil output. The European Union's own critical raw materials assessments have flagged that the vast majority of its niobium supply traces back to Brazil. The United States, according to that same USGS reporting, mines none domestically at all. It is 100% import reliant, and the overwhelming share of that comes from a single company. When one nation supplies almost the entire developed world with a material that has no viable substitute, that is not just an interesting fact about mining, it is a form of leverage, whether or not anyone ever chooses to use it. So why hasn't this triggered the kind of alarm we've seen around lithium, cobalt, or rare earth elements? Partly because the supply has been remarkably stable. Analysts covering the sector note that roughly 85 to 90% of niobium sales happen through long-term contracts rather than an open volatile spot market. That structure has kept prices calm for years, even during periods when other critical minerals swung wildly on global markets. But calm supply built on a single point of failure is not the same thing as secure supply. It simply means the risk hasn't been tested yet. This is where it actually matters to you, even if you'll never buy niobium directly in your life. If Araxá ever faced a serious disruption, a natural disaster, a labor dispute, a change in Brazilian mining policy, or a deliberate export restriction, the ripple effects would not stay in Brazil. Automakers relying on high-strength steel could face rising production costs that eventually show up in the price of a new car. Pipeline and infrastructure projects already running on tight margins could see delays measured in months, not weeks. And any country trying to scale up next-generation battery technology using niobium-based materials, something CBMM has been actively developing through partnerships with major electronics and automotive companies since 2024, would suddenly be negotiating from a position of weakness rather than strength. This isn't a hypothetical for some distant future. Industrial economies from Detroit to Stuttgart to Shanghai are already built on the assumption that this particular supply chain simply will not break. Defense contractors face the same exposure. High-strength alloys used in military vehicles, ship hulls, and aircraft components rely on the same niobium supply as civilian industry, which means a disruption wouldn't just raise consumer prices. It could complicate procurement timelines for national defense programs that assume this material will always be available on demand. Now, it's worth being fair to both sides of this story because it isn't as simple as one company controls the world and that's automatically dangerous. From Brazil's perspective and from CBMM's own public position, this dominance is the result of 70 years of investment, not an accident of geology being weaponized. The company was founded in 1955, began mining and production operations in Araxá in 1961, and spent decades building the refining technology, the customer relationships, and the industrial trust that made it the default global supplier long before anyone was using the phrase critical minerals. Brazilian officials and industry analysts frame this as a legitimate national economic asset, comparable to how oil-rich nations view their reserves, and point out that Brazil has been a stable, cooperative supplier for decades, never once weaponizing niobium exports the way some other critical mineral producers have been accused of doing with their own resources. On the other side, policymakers in the United States and the European Union have started treating this concentration as a genuine strategic vulnerability, regardless of how well Brazil has behaved as a supplier so far. The EU has formally listed niobium under its critical raw materials framework, bureaucratic language that essentially means, we know we're exposed here and we don't like it. Some Western industry groups have gone further, arguing that any material this essential, with zero large-scale alternative source, represents an unacceptable single point of failure for national defense and infrastructure planning, regardless of the supplier's track record. The concern isn't that Brazil is currently doing anything wrong. It's that no industrial economy should have this much of its steel, aerospace, and future battery supply chain resting on the decisions of one company in one region, no matter how reliable that company has been until now. There's one more layer to this that rarely gets attention. CBMM itself is not entirely Brazilian-owned anymore. While the founding Brazilian family retains majority control, minority stakes have been sold over the years to Japanese, Korean, and Chinese industrial consortiums, according to the company's own disclosures. That means some of the same countries competing for influence over global supply chains, including China, already hold a financial stake in the one company that supplies the raw material Western steel, aerospace, and defense industries depend on. It doesn't mean anyone is pulling strings behind the scenes, but it does mean the ownership picture is more layered than a simple Brazil versus the West framing would suggest, and it's part of why some Western policymakers see this as more urgent than a purely domestic Brazilian issue. So what happens from here? There are a few realistic paths, and it's worth being honest that nobody can say for certain which one plays out. One possibility is that very little changes for a long time. Brazil continues supplying the world efficiently. CBMM continues expanding into new applications like battery-grade niobium materials, and the rest of the world continues quietly depending on a supply chain that works precisely because almost no one questions it. Given how deep this concentration already runs, and how expensive and slow it would be to build a competing source from scratch, analysts suggest this is arguably the most likely near-term outcome. A second possibility is gradual diversification. Canada's Niobium mine could expand output. Emerging deposits in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, along with new exploration projects elsewhere, could slowly start chipping away at Brazil's share. Though experts are clear this would likely take years, not months, given how capital-intensive and slow mine development actually is. Recycling is another lever worth watching. Current niobium recycling rates sit at under 1% globally, according to industry estimates, which means there's meaningful room to reduce primary demand over time if the economics ever make that worthwhile for manufacturers. A third, more disruptive possibility is that materials science eventually finds a genuine substitute, some alternative alloying process that delivers similar strength gains without relying on niobium at all. Engineers have been searching for exactly this for years without success, so this shouldn't be treated as something likely to happen soon. But research into alternative high-strength steel alloys has reportedly been gaining more attention as governments and manufacturers grow more uncomfortable with this level of supply concentration, so it's not something to rule out over a longer horizon either. What's actually happening right now is a quieter version of all three at once. Governments are watching. Companies are hedging where they can. And Brazil, for its part, continues to hold one of the most concentrated positions of economic leverage that any single country has over any single industrial input on the planet today, a position that took 70 years to build and would take just as long for anyone else to replicate. It's a reminder that geopolitical power doesn't always look like military bases or naval fleets or headline-grabbing summits. Sometimes it looks like a mine in Minas Gerais that most people will never see, quietly underpinning the cars, the pipelines, the hospitals, and the bridges an entire planet depends on every single day without a single headline to show for it. If stories like this are the kind of analysis you want more of, the parts of geopolitics that don't make the front page but actually shape how the world works, that's exactly what this channel is built around. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the stories everyone else is missing.